Okay, great. Yeah, sorry for the little hiccup. Thank you so much for the introduction. And also thank you, QueerInAI, for hosting this wonderful virtual event. The work you do is really so amazing for us queer people in AI spaces. Yeah, and thank you also everyone for joining my talk today. This is my first time giving a rather personal talk at an academic setting, and also my first time speaking at a QueerInAI event. So I'm a little bit nervous, but also very excited. So I got the idea for the topic of today's talk when QueerInAI first invited me to give a keynote talk at this workshop. And when I heard from them, I was really excited and happy that they thought of me. But one of my first reactions was also, am I really queer enough to give a keynote talk at QueerInAI? I couldn't help feeling that I wasn't truly qualified to give a talk here since I'm not as overtly gay, whatever that means, than some other people. Or I felt like I haven't had to struggle or suffer because of my sexuality as much as some of the other queer friends that I have. And that's where I caught myself queer imposter syndroming. So what is queer imposter syndrome? I think most of us have heard of or experienced imposter syndrome in an academic setting before, where you feel like you're not as competent as others believe you are, or you feel like you don't actually deserve to be at the place you are right now, and that you're somehow fooling other people. And queer imposter syndrome is a similar feeling of inadequacy, where you feel like you're not queer enough to identify with the LGBTQ community or to belong in queer spaces. And when I first had this idea, I pitched this idea to one of the QueerInAI organizers, I honestly thought that I was being a clever queer academic, and I thought I coined this expression. But it turns out that that wasn't the case at all. And there are already lots of articles online about other people sharing their experience with queer imposter syndrome. And it seems like it's a quite common experience, especially among bisexual people and some other members of the LGBT community. And I was initially afraid that this topic would be somewhat of a first world problem and that I would be removing attention from some more pressing issues for QueerInAI. But I was really glad to hear that the people in QueerInAI also love this topic and found it worth sharing. So during this talk, I will mostly be drawing from my own experiences. So definitely don't take anything I say and generalize it to a certain population. Just take whatever is relatable to you as well. And in the first part, I will mostly share my personal experiences of not feeling queer enough, hoping that this would maybe resonate with some of you and make you feel less alone, or also be clarifying for others. So hi again, I'm Kayo, and I'm a straight passing bisexual. When people meet me for the first time, more often than not, they assume that I am straight. I think because of the way I present myself. So this photo is me from Pride last weekend. And I have to say, I looked more gay that day than I probably did for the rest of the year. I even cut my own hair into a bi bob during Pride Month. Before that, it was very long. And yet during Pride, I met a few other queer people who thought I was a straight ally. I actually have a lot of anecdotes of people thinking that I am straight, despite me saying or doing something that I think is obviously queer. I can share some off the record if people are interested, but I just don't want to make the people in question feel guilty that they misassumed if they ever happen to see this talk. And to be even more straight passing, I have also mostly been in heterosexual relationships during the past 3 years. So there's very little gay signal from me that you can probably pick up on. And I think I have never really gone through someone's gaydar before. And yeah, I constantly also struggle with finding the right moment or the right way to come out to new people that I meet. Because on one hand, I'm usually open about my sexuality, and I would prefer that people know that I'm bisexual rather than thinking I was something else. The ideal case would for people to just not try to make assumptions about my sexuality. But on the other hand, I also don't feel comfortable yet of just explicitly announcing, hey, I'm bi, whenever I meet someone new. And it's hard for me sometimes to find a more organic way to come out. I actually just realized that I signed a lease with two female roommates for next year around 2 months ago, but I still haven't told them that I'm queer, and I don't think it was ever brought up in our discussions. So I'm having like a mini bi panic that maybe I should have told them before we signed the lease, but I think it's going to be okay. So because of the way that I'm perceived and also because of my lived experience, I've often felt like I'm not adequate or not queer enough to be part of the queer community. And that by participating in these communities, I was either a fraud or I was making others believe I am more queer than I actually am, or that someone else would think that I'm straight or not queer enough to be in these spaces. And I felt like an imposter because although I have dated men, women, and non-binary people, I have only been in exclusive relationships with men. And this has made me second guess also whether I am truly able to have a longer term serious relationships with other people of other genders, or whether I really am attracted to women. And I think that, the fact that me having only serious relationships with men has more to do with just statistics and the kind of environment I was in rather than my preferences or anything else. Because I mean, I generally knew much more men who are attracted to women than women who are attracted to women. And also I went to an engineering school for college, which meant that I didn't really interact with that many women, period. And also in my personal experience, my sexual preferences have fluctuated a lot. So up until I was around 16, I always presumed that I was straight, though I was a pretty late bloomer and I can only remember having this one crush, this boy in my jazz band when I was around 13. That was like the only romantic interest I had until like I was in high school. And then when I had my first crush on a girl, I still felt like that didn't make me queer enough to label myself or consider myself LGBT, but I didn't feel entirely straight either. And around this time, I also ran a semi-popular blog on Tumblr. So I had a lot of like anonymous asks who were curious about my sexuality. And I have to say, I did a pretty good job at dodging their questions and avoiding any labels for a while. But yeah, so during this period, I told myself that I was heteroflexible, and I didn't know that it was possible that I was bisexual because I didn't feel equally attracted to different genders. So when I was around 17, I came to terms with myself being bisexual. And for around 2 years, I was mostly attracted to women. Then I was in one hetero relationship after another, and during that time, I was mostly just attracted to my boyfriend. So whenever I was in a period where the blue curve was higher than the pink curve, I couldn't help but wonder if like the last like pink peak that I have was like a phase or something, and I eventually like, converged to like being back straight, or like I kept on like still questioning my sexuality. And in general, I felt inadequate because I haven't really experienced the tragedies that others have faced for their queerness, which I'm very lucky to be in this position. I have never felt unsafe because of the way I looked, or never have I had to hide my serious relationships from my family and the public. And from this feeling of inadequacy, I noticed that I also felt like I had to prove myself to people in the queer community. When interacting with queer people, I would try to talk more about which women I was attracted to and less about the men that I was attracted to. And I'd consciously try to say things that I thought would like make me seem queer, like, oh, I played soccer in college, or oh, I will like die for every girl in Euphoria. Just to be like, hey, I may look straight and I may have a boyfriend, but I'm still one of you guys. And I also felt strangely validated by like all these like little stereotypes, like how like I still haven't learned how to drive, or that I walk much, much faster than all of my straight friends. Even though there are like queer stereotypes that I also do not really relate to it. So yeah, so although on the outside, I would be preaching bi visibility and telling other bisexuals and LGBT people that we are all valid and we belong, inside, I couldn't help but feel internalized biphobia. And a lot of the narratives I had in my head were actually not helpful for neither myself or the queer community in general. So now I'll share some things that have helped me overcome some of my imposter syndrome. And I still catch myself imposter syndroming, but I'm at a better place now where I can quickly reaffirm myself out of it. And also, if any of you have stories or tips you'd like to share as well, I would love to hear it afterwards. So the first step for me to overcome queer imposter syndrome was to realize that I had queer imposter syndrome and acknowledge that a lot of it had to do with internalized biphobia. I had to reaffirm to myself that me feeling not adequate because I was dating men or because my sexual preferences kept changing or because I look straight, it's a harmful narrative, and that I've probably internalized it from either the media or people I've interacted with. So for me now, whenever I start feeling like an imposter again, I try to remind myself what I would tell any other bi person. And I also think that it's sad that we, or at least I implicitly associate the experience of being queer with pain and suffering. I don't want to minimize the struggles that people have gone through, that they are still going through in a cis heteronormative society. But I don't think it's helpful either to me to have this narrative that I'm not queer enough if I haven't struggled enough. And this tip is helpful for imposter syndrome in general as well. So I'm including this slide for y'all academics. So once I realized that I had imposter syndrome, both in career spaces and in academic spaces, then it became easier for me to identify when I was feeling inadequate because of a harmful narrative, and then to let go of that harmful thought and reaffirm myself with a more positive way of thinking. Another thing that really helped more than I thought it would was to hang out more with other multisexual people. When I first started being openly bi, I started going to lots of queer spaces and lesbian bars in my town, and I started to meet a lot of other queer people, but I still didn't know many bi or pansexual people. So I couldn't really find others who really related to my feelings of queer imposter syndrome. But once I started meeting and interacting with other bi people, I found out that queer imposter syndrome is much more common than I thought. And it was also really therapeutic to kind of dump my imposter feelings and have others who also share this experience. So I feel really lucky that I've had networks of bi friends where we got to validate each other and relate to each other. And again, this also helps for imposter syndrome in general, because when I first got into academia, it was really helpful to me too when I heard from other academics, especially people who seem like super successful and fully deserving of all of their accomplishments, when I heard from them about their imposter syndrome. And I think that people are often more able to be compassionate and kind to other people than to themselves about these things. So it's easier to see how absurd an imposter syndrome thought is when we see it in others than in ourselves. And the third and final tip that worked for me is just to unapologetically be myself and loudly take space in queer communities. Because part of me feeling like a fraud was because in hopes to prove myself to others, I wasn't truly being myself all the time. And so, of course, I felt like a fraud. But once I was able to undo some of the biphobic narrative, it was easier for me to believe in myself that I was queer enough just the way I was. And so I wanted to also stop saying things that I didn't actually believe in, or avoid mentioning certain things because I was scared that it would make me seem straight. And so I stopped worrying about not looking stereotypically queer and became and then presented the way I wanted to. I stopped saying things like, Yeah, I'm bi, but I'm mostly just attracted to girls and the one guy I'm dating, but oh, ew, guys, cause that wasn't really true either. I stopped holding myself back from gushing over men in front of my queer friends because why not? And I joined queer organizations and acting like I 100% belong there. And after I got to surround myself with queer people who also affirmed my sexuality, while I was also being 100% myself, then there it became easier to stop feeling like an imposter and truly feel welcomed and belonging to the queer community. So one last thing that I want to add in this talk is that I don't think there's any such thing as not being queer enough. Because if you're queer, then you're queer, period. And there's no single right way to be queer. So now I'm happy to take any questions. And I also want to add that there's really no wrong questions. And I'm happy to answer anything that you might be curious about. And if you also prefer, please feel free to reach out to me after this talk for any questions or if you just want somebody to talk to. Thank you.